So an officer goes into a convenience store, hears a gunshot, turns the corner, sees the clerk down, and a gunman standing over him. The officer identifies himself and tells the person to drop the weapon. They drop the weapon, but they run. Can a cop legally shoot that person? Hey guys, what's going on? I hope everybody has had a fantastic weekend so far. I get emails every single day with people asking me to watch certain YouTube videos to see if something was justified or to get my opinion on it. And a lot of those questions are very hard for me to answer because most cases are not black and white. A lot of them have gray area, they need research, and I don't have time to look up every single case that I'm sent. The important thing to remember about law enforcement and the ability they have to do their job is to remember that there are things called case laws in place that kind of dictate what officers can do or what they can't do legally. I could easily make this into an hour-long video, but I'm a little bit pressed for time right now, so I'm going to try to hit some of the highlights and maybe answer some of the questions that you guys have had. So straight to the point, can an officer legally use deadly force on somebody that's unarmed? The simple answer, if you want to call it that, is yes. Secondly, does an officer have to go through the steps of use of force before jumping straight to deadly force? And the answer is no, they don't. It gets so tiring seeing these Monday morning quarterbacks in the comment section of YouTube, and I see comments like, the guy was unarmed, the officer had no right to do that. The dumbass comments go on, but at the end of the day, a comment on YouTube does not dictate what I can and can't do legally with my job. Case law does. I always found it funny when people pull out their phones and they're filming you. They're like, I'm gonna put you on YouTube. First of all, I'm already on there. Here's my channel. Secondly, I haven't done anything illegal, and my decision is supported by the U.S. Supreme Court. So with that in mind, let's take a look at what I initially asked. When it comes to use of force, courts judge officers based on whether or not they were objectively reasonable. Two very important case laws when it comes to any type of use of force: Tennessee versus Gardner and Graham versus Connor. If you are getting into any law enforcement field in the United States, I guarantee you those two case laws are going to be on some test at some point during the academy. And it's important to know the answer for the test, but it's more important to understand what the case law actually says. This gives you confidence, it gives you the ability to act on your feet and know what your boundaries are. For instance, Tennessee versus Gardner. It was decided by the U.S. Supreme Court on March 27, 1985. Apprehension by the use of deadly force is a seizure subject to the Fourth Amendment's reasonableness requirement. And basically this case just stems from an officer that shot a fleeing felon. He was burglarizing a home. Officer rolled up on him. The kid, I guess I should say, he was a teenager, was running away from the officer. Officer shot and killed him. The court held that it was unconstitutional for the officer to kill him simply because he's a fleeing felon. Now, if you guys look at most of these case laws that have to do with use of force and officers, you are going to see the words reasonable and necessary riddled all throughout. So let's say in the scenario that I gave you guys, which is an actual case, the officer goes into the convenience store, he doesn't see the clerk, he hears a loud gunshot, he turns the corner and walks in to see a clerk down unresponsive and a suspect standing over them with a gun. He identifies himself as the police. The guy drops the gun, runs out the door. The officer chases after him and shoots and kills him. Under those circumstances, is the officer justified in using deadly force? The answer is yes, absolutely. Regardless of what most people think, most cops got into this line of work because they want to help people and they want to protect people. I don't wake up every day wondering who I'm going to shoot. Are there assholes in this profession? Absolutely. There's also assholes at Walmart. But before people start typing away at their keyboards with their Dorito-stained fingers, it's very important to realize whether or not the officer was justified in what they did. Even if it didn't look right on camera, you have to go by case law and whether the officer was using necessary force. The courts have basically said that they can't expect an officer to read people's minds, so in a situation like that, the officer did what he thought was the best option at the time to stop a threat. How do you know that that guy wasn't going to go out and kill someone else? What if he was a serial killer? Now, some people would not agree with this. However, it's not what you agree with or not, it's what case law says. Sure, reasonableness is definitely subjective. What I think might be reasonable, someone else might not think is reasonable. That's why we have to go by case law. And that's also why it's so important for officers to use what is called the totality of the circumstances to articulate why they used force in a particular situation. Not necessarily even deadly force, but just any kind of force. in that particular scenario, again, how is the officer supposed to know that that person is not going to go out and harm someone else? And for cases like this, there are 4 things. It's called the 4-prong test. The first one is whether the suspect poses an immediate threat to officers or other people, the severity of the crime, whether the suspect is actively resisting arrest, and whether the suspect is a flight risk or attempting to escape custody. Now, the important thing to remember about use of force or deadly force or anything, when it comes to the 4-prong test, not every criteria needs to be met before force can be used. It's not like, okay, he got 1 through 3, but he didn't get 4, so he can't do that. It's not the way it works. Even if the officer never sees a firearm, let's use a whole separate scenario, and I'm making this one up. Let's say that we have a serial killer on the loose. We all know who he is. I see him in the streets. He has no weapon whatsoever. I get out. I identify myself. I tell him he's under arrest. He takes off running. I am legally justified in the use of deadly force at that point because he poses an imminent danger to other people. The key in a situation like that is to use any amount of force necessary to effect the arrest. So basically, if you steal a candy bar at a store and you run from an officer, but he has no reason to believe that you're armed and that you're dangerous, he can't use deadly force. Now, if you shoot 2 people in an armed robbery and then police make contact with you and you run, then they are justified in using deadly force. Again, guys, I could make this an hour-long video easily. There's so much case law, and so, dude, when it comes to use of force, that is one of the biggest things that they harp on us about, is getting as much use of force training as you can, and that's revisiting these old case laws. It's looking at new cases that have come up. It's an ever-evolving thing. But the key thing to remember is that officers can use force that is reasonable and necessary. Those are the 2 key words. As long as the officer is objectively reasonable, he's covered under the color of law. So even if you don't necessarily agree with a shooting, even if you think it's a bad shooting, you have to look at it from a standpoint of whether it was reasonable and necessary. Because really, at the end of the day, our opinions, mine included, it doesn't matter. At the end of the day, it's what the court says is legal. So you can agree with it and love the officer, you can disagree with it and hate the officer. Either way, we have to go by case law and the court. Anyway, guys, that is it for today. I am going to go home and edit this real quick. Like I said, I really would love to do an hour-long video on this. I have a lot I have to do today, so more importantly, though, I wanted to get a video out to you guys before I start the week back at work, because I know I'm probably not going to have a lot of time. So as always, if you have any questions or comments, leave them in the comment section below, and I'll try to address them accordingly. Thank you guys so much for watching. I hope you enjoy the rest of your Sunday, and I will see you guys very, very soon.